All the footage in the previous episode of Archive Thrifting was done in one day. Now, I failed to mention in that episode that actually was not my first attempt at doing an Archive Thrifting installment since I moved in. So, a couple of weeks after I moved in, this was early July, I set out to make an Archive Thrifting episode, but I only got 2 usable segments, coming in at a total of about 8 minutes. And one of those segments was shot at a regular thrift store here in Sioux Falls, and the other was at this antique store down in this little place called Canton, which is about 30 to 40 minutes southeast of here. And there was some good stuff in that footage, and I didn't want to throw it out. So after I finished the last episode of Archive Thrifting, I decided I would go back and just hit up my 3 most regular haunts here in Sioux Falls, whether I found anything or not, shoot it, and flesh this whole thing out. And that's what I've done. So I think you'll be able to tell just by the weather when everything was shot. And otherwise, let's get down to business. This was shot at the Only Savers in Sioux Falls on the 4th of July. It was sale day that day, but as it turned out, it was only for clothes and kitchen stuff. In the records, there was this Peter Pan 45, which I wasn't all that interested in anyway. Now, I mentioned in the last installment that I've been encountering more CEDs than I have ever seen in my life since I've been here. And there were some pretty seriously deep titles here, 2 of which were still sealed. And at $1.99 a piece, yeah, I picked out a few. And spoiler alert, I picked these 3. Now, above those were a few more titles, much more common ones, that sat there for another 2 months and were presumably ultimately thrown out. Now, in the records proper, I found a Strawberry Shortcake picture disc on Kid Stuff Records. And I hate picture discs because it's a lot harder to gauge the condition, and the ones I've had have always sounded bad. And between my general distaste for kids' records and the $4 price tag, I just wasn't taking it. Now, yeah, this was the day that the Elvisception, or Elvinception, began. I've seen a lot of Elvis records in the thrift store bins around here, and they always seem to be anywhere from 2 to 5 times the price of any other record. And they're never even the good ones. They're always the cheapy Camden and Pickwick compilations. Now, aside from that, I found this nice vintage Buck Owens album, but I'm not really that much of a fan. Already have that J. Geils Band on CD, and the LP was trashed. There's a minor archive classic for you that YouTube gave me hell for excerpting one time, and it inspired the borderline lost Divorce VHS Vault episode. And then there's what I thought might have been a legit Sesame Street album, but as it turns out, it was actually a Pickwick knockoff. And I guess the presence of the Archie's covers should have tipped me off right away, and yeah, Bugs Bauer strikes again, and it was totally trashed. Now, at the time, I was still trying to scrounge together some furniture, including an office chair, and they wanted $13 for this beaten, slashed-up hunk of crap. I wound up buying a new one. And above that, there was a 90s vintage Pioneer AV rack, missing a couple of the shelves, and was just a tad too small for some of the components that I wanted to stick in there. So close, yet so far. And the haul from this store was a pretty terrible looking Daffy Duck Little LP on Peter Pan Records, evidently not voiced by Mel Blanc, and the 3 aforementioned CEDs, 2 of which were still sealed. So we've got Gene Wilder doing his best Rudolph Valentino impression, Yes, Giorgio, with Luciano Pavarotti, gotta have a little culture in archive land, and Between the Lines, one of those 70s hippies coming-of-age movies. Okay, I thought given that it was Saturday, everything would be open, but the store I wanted to visit wasn't open that day, and I haven't been back since. Another one down the street was not only closed, but it was long abandoned. Yeah, it's no longer downtown, it's just town now. Budget cuts, I guess. And, well, I wouldn't be surprised if all that stuff in there has been sitting there since 1987. And here's the one store that was actually open, and it wasn't a terribly pleasant experience. The owner was yelling and cursing his brains out the whole time I was in there. I had one of those. Haven't felt the desire to own another one, but cool. Now, the records were totally unmarked, no prices, no nothing. Some decent classic rock stuff in there, and, well, there's a Shelby Singleton special. I discussed these back on the Elvis Exploitation episode. After he bought out Sun Records, he went back and overdubbed a lot of unreleased tapes, then released them as if they were new product. And otherwise, a lot of country stuff, no shock there. And, well, apparently Scott Baio had a record out at one point. And I found some old Mad magazines at $25 a pop. But what really amused me here was how schizophrenic this stack was, because between the Mad magazines, there were a lot of religious comics and magazines, and I love Mad, but $25 a piece was just too rich for my blood. So that's where my first guitar went. I've been looking all over for that thing. Now this looked downright scary. Raleigh's Poultry Powder, probably from the early 20th century. And this looks downright medicine show snake oil-ish. For increasing the production of flesh and eggs. I don't want to know. Even the seed companies were jumping on the disco bandwagon back in the 70s. Ladies and gentlemen, the remains of Edith Prickly. It's pretty rare that I see real vintage TVs. I'd imagine this RCA is from the late 50s or early 60s, and it's always cool to see this stuff, but I have no place or use for it, and especially since these things don't have hookups, they kind of predate home video, it's useless to me. No idea if $65 is a good price or not. Now, down in the bargain basement, I found an initially tempting pair of speakers, but they're not a set. The bottom one's a Pioneer, and the top one, if I'll ever pan up to it, is a Panasonic. And they were both in pretty terrible condition. I always get a little nervous when I see an old large metal container. I feel like I'm always about to find the remains of an animal or something. But this turned out to be cool. It's an honest-to-God electric magic lantern, the forerunner to the slide projector, and this thing is a freaking tank. This has got to be one of the last ones. We're talking 1930s or 40s here. But it's $75 and probably unsafe to use at this point, plus finding a bulb for it. I think I'm gonna pass. There is some footage of these things in action on YouTube, though. Check those videos out. I was briefly considering picking this thing up. It's a K-Tel Golf King, designed to help you with your golf swing.
Introducing K-Tel's Golf King, the practice set designed to help improve your swing. Simply tap it into the turf and swing away. Golf King even adjusts for left-handers. Practice high tee shots or quickly reset, lowering the ball for fairway shots.
But given my past history with K-Tel products and my lack of a proper golf club, it's probably for the best. I'd probably just hit that sucker right through a neighbor's window or something. I guess $12.75 isn't too terrible a price, but it's just not happening. Jumping ahead to the end of September, we're at one of the 2 Goodwills that I've started frequenting, and I still am not really a fan of Goodwills, but let's check it out anyway. Oh, Halloween season must be on the horizon. I approve. But what I don't approve of is the kind of treatment this witch is getting. I mean, hanging her by her shoulders with potato chip bag clips, that's just cold. Otherwise, we've got some rather tacky drinkware, and of course the obligatory It's the Great Pumpkin Charlie Brown VHS tape. But I will only accept that title on Betamax, thank you very much. I do like seeing this stuff, though. It keeps what's left of my inner child alive. Now, back in the books, I found this Radio Shack electronic baseball game inexplicably mixed in, and it seems to work. It powered on, if nothing else, but I'm really not into these things. I don't collect them, but I'm sure the $2.50 they wanted for it is a good price for somebody, but I clearly had absolutely no idea how to play this. I hate it when they lump in the toys with the clothes. It always makes things so awkward. And Mario Nintendo licensing gone crazy. No thanks. And some sort of Logitech joystick. I don't know my ass from a hole in the ground when it comes to this stuff, and I just gotta get out of this section. Now, back in the records, I immediately found this QMO Records knockoff album, Today's Top Hits. All the songs are from 1970, and it looked so promising. I can't imagine how bad these folks would screw up tunes like Ma Belle Amie and The Rapper and Something's Burning. But this was a double LP at some point, and one of the discs was missing, and the remaining disc was totally trashed. Otherwise, I would have picked it up. Now, elsewhere in the records, well, it's the kind of selection that I dread. I only found one decent album in the lot, and that was a later reissue copy of Elton John's Goodbye Yellow Brick Road, which kinda looks like somebody put their cigarette out on it. I already have the Mobile Fidelity CD of this one anyway. I've been finding a lot more video games here than I ever did back in Colorado. It's just a shame they're all crappy sports games and Guitar Hero sort of stuff. Now, I wasn't entirely sure this movie really existed, but here it is. Big Money Hustlers, featuring the Insane Clown Posse. And I couldn't/can't stand ICP. I only found out later that this is actually fairly rare and valuable. Stupid Ben. Ladies and gentlemen, the biggest electronic selection in Sioux Falls. I kid you not. 3 small ultra-cheap DVD players with no remotes, and 1 larger ultra-cheap DVD player with no remote, and an ice cream churn and some kitchen junk. And on to as close to a neighborhood thrift store as I've got. Even though this is a smaller Goodwill, I've actually had more luck here than at that last location. But let's see if they have anything today. Nice. I love it when stores have a sense of humor. Mixed in with the pathetically small electronics section is a zebra print crock pot, for some reason. And we've got an old router and a set of composite cables. Lovely. The only interesting thing in this section was this show box, which I've never heard of. Apparently this is a speaker/power strip to play Christmas music or whatever in the front of your house and have it sync up to your Christmas lights or whatever, and you control it with your smartphone. It sounds like a disaster and a half. And I've already got a long enough reputation in my neighborhood, so I don't need or want the extra attention that this would bring. Back in the DVD section, I found a thankfully dead trend. Because, of course, playing classical music to your kid is going to somehow make them suddenly magically smarter. Next to that was the Pull-Ups Potty Training Success DVD, which I would have picked up had I not suddenly remembered that my subseries is called VHS Vault. Speaking of VHS Vault, I haven't found a single VHS Vault candidate since I've been here. The only notable thing in here today was this still-sealed 3-tape Three Stooges set, and I remember seeing these things new back in the late 90s. And if this were the late 90s, I totally would have jumped on it, but I have the complete Three Stooges DVD box set now, so it's just redundant. Otherwise, there's what I initially thought was a public domain Godzilla tape, but it was actually one of those 90s Paramount Gateway budget releases, which always just looked and sounded like ass. Now, in the CDs, I found another bit of 90s weirdness, and that would be chant. So, in the middle of Enigma and Enya, an album of Benedictine monk chants somehow became a hit. I mean, I think this was a #1 album back in 94-ish. Part of me wishes we could go through another period like this, if only to shake things up a little. Aside from that, I have been picking up the occasional locally produced album since I've been here, but I've been trying to avoid the overtly religious stuff, and this seems to fall pretty squarely into that territory, so I passed. And they had a whole bunch of this guy's albums, and each one looked even more dull than the last. In the records, I found an album from a group called the Deacons, who are inexplicably dressed in Civil War garb, including Germs Won't Bees. There's a song title for you. Oh, I get it. It's actually 2 different song titles, and God Loves to Talk to Little Boys. That's got to be down there with He Touched Me on the list of easily misinterpreted Christian song titles. And I prefer to drill my own center hole into my records, thank you very much. Otherwise, it's, once again, the kind of record selection that I dread. We've got loads of easy listening, mainstream Christmas music, world music, country, of course, classical, and, oh boy, this just looks bad. What is that? Evie Sands, I believe. And that stood out. Warren Zevon, Bad Luck Streak and Dancing School. Still mostly sealed, though I already have it on CD and vinyl. But that grotesque, badly placed cutout hole put me off. And upon further inspection, it turned out that whoever drilled that hole drilled right through the edge of the record itself. Otherwise, well, I've got that Alan Sherman album on CD already. Frigidaire Presents an Evening with Lum and Abner. There's a good joke in there somewhere. How to Live with Yourself, or What to Do Until the Psychiatrist Comes, which seems to be a hybrid self-help / comedy record, and it looked pretty lame, so I passed, of course. Now, I managed to misread the title of, well, that record as A World of Wieners. Probably would have been more interesting. And I've already got some of those Marcy albums. And let's see, Mike Douglas, the talk show host, apparently had a record out at some point, on Wonderland Records no less. And since we've got Marcy, we might as well have Eric, everyone's third favorite religious ventriloquist's dummy behind Sharky and Marcy. I need to figure out what to do with my Marcy albums first. Okay, why are we naming thrift stores after indie rockers? Regardless, this is as close to a favorite thrift store as I've got around here so far. In the otherwise lousy electronics section, I about fell over when I saw this box for a GAF 3100S Super 8 sound projector from about 1974, and as it turned out, that's what it was, for $5. Oh man, let's take a look. Well, there's the take-up reel. And given that this is comparatively recent, it runs on still available, I think, halogen bulbs, so I don't have to rely on new old stock. I like that. And it's got record functions, a PA jack, an auxiliary jack, Varispeed, way more features than my 1968-ish Sears unit, but there's a problem. Some moron yanked the power cord so hard it took the housing with it. So I quick looked up the going rate for this model on Fleabay, and... humbug. In the toy section, we've got nothing of note at all. Got lots of puzzles that are probably missing a ton of pieces. Ugh, this is just depressing. One rack over, I found a game that looked kinda interesting, Nip Nop, which looks like it's a bit of a skill game. I think it's shot, though, 'cause, well, I was having trouble with my balls. Just couldn't seem to whack 'em hard enough. And I also managed to misread this as both Bling Ball and Bong Ball, and it doesn't look like much of a ball at all, actually. In the music section, I found a delightfully late 80s looking Memorex tape, which just seemed to be someone's Whitney Houston dub. And I found a tape from some guy named Ray Boltz. I much prefer Ray Nuts. So much innuendo today. And I found this Mahalia Jackson boxed set. Never seen any of her stuff in the wild, but I'm going to leave this for someone that'll appreciate it more than I ever will. In the records, well, you know the drill. A rather unremarkable looking selection of CDs today. Lots of kids stuff, 90s stuff. Well, here's a double disc Tanya Tucker anthology. You know, I like some of her hits, and this is on Raven Records, an Australian reissue label whose releases I've always found to be good to great, so it's not showing up on camera, but it does need some love. But you know what? For $1, I'll take it. And it's the least worst VHS section in Sioux Falls. I've actually picked up a couple of off-air recordings from here. Strangely enough, no local ones yet, though. And there's a minor flashback. I haven't seen Babysitter's Club stuff in years. Not that I was ever into any of that. No, really, I never read any of the books or anything. Otherwise, we've got Gang of Four, nothing to do with the band apparently, and it's some sort of card game, it looks like, that got lumped in with the tapes. And speaking of lumped in, there were a few PC games, none of which looked all that interesting to me. But watch, they're probably valuable or something. Otherwise, we've got a copy of Dorfon Golf. I still actually have my old copy of that from when I was a kid. And we've got Worth Winning with Mark Harmon, back when he was still considered ostensibly a comedian, at least comic actor. Some tapes from that company that must not be named, a reissue of Richard Simmons' Sweatin' to the Oldies. My mom actually had the original issue of that. And we've got a mystery box. And, well, if I can just open the thing, we'll take a look at it. We've got James Cartoons, 6 hours, return to Bill for more. Well, it's still got the record tab in it, and for 50 cents I'll pick it up. Maybe there's some off-air stuff on it. Anyway, behind the VHS rack were a few items that fell. We've got Legend of the Guardians for the Nintendo DS. Don't have one, a DS that is. NBA Live 97 for the PlayStation. Don't care. And there's a loose game in there that I don't care about. And a record. And it's Keep Fit, Be Happy with Bonnie Prudden. I'm not fit or happy enough to fish that one out. And the haul from this store is the Tanya Tucker anthology, the mystery, hopefully off-air VHS tape, there it is, and yes, after seeing the Fleabay prices, I figured I'd better pick up the projector and try and rebuild the housing for the power cord. Wish me luck. And the final haul for this episode consists of 3 CEDs, 2 of which are still sealed, the rather dubious-looking Daffy Duck record, the Tanya Tucker double-disc anthology, the mystery VHS tape, which I've actually looked at and actually does have some rather unremarkable off-air footage on it, and the GAF 3100S Super 8 sound projector, which is currently residing in the for repair pile. And if you have any ideas on how to fix it, let me know. And the total price came out to, after tax, about $14. And that's it for today. I'll talk to you again soon.
Peanuts, popcorn, Cracker Jack. Peanuts, popcorn, Cracker Jack. That sounds like my old pal Daffy Duck. Me. What's up, Duck? What are you yelling for? I'm yelling because I want some peanuts,